The sun was just beginning to rise as people slowly boarded the luxury flight from Los Angeles to New York. It was a first-class flight, quiet, expensive, and filled with powerful business people, influencers, and celebrities who valued privacy. Among them was a woman named Clarissa, who wore gold earrings, high heels, and a strong perfume that filled the air around her. She walked with confidence, head held high, looking around at others like they were beneath her. She gave the staff a quick glance, but no smile, and didn't bother to say thank you when they offered help. Her seat was near the front, next to the window, and as she placed her designer bag above her, she suddenly froze. Next to her seat, already sitting, was a man wearing a hoodie, jeans, and old sneakers. He had long hair tied back loosely, and a beard that looked like he hadn't shaved in days. He sat quietly, reading a small book, not bothering anyone, but Clarissa made a face, loud enough for others to see, and muttered, "Ooh, unbelievable." She turned to a flight attendant and whispered, "Excuse me, are you sure I'm in the right seat?" "I thought first class had standards." The flight attendant smiled politely and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. This is your seat." Clarissa gave a fake smile, then sat down with a heavy sigh, crossing her legs and pulling her blanket up like a wall between her and the man. She leaned closer to another passenger and said softly, but not softly enough, "Looks like they're letting economy wander into first class now." The man beside her didn't react. He kept reading, quietly, calmly, as if her words didn't exist, but others noticed. Some passengers looked up from their phones, and a few even whispered among themselves. A child across the aisle kept staring at the man, eyes wide in curiosity. He whispered something to his mother, who smiled but said nothing. Clarissa noticed and rolled her eyes. "They're probably starstruck by the wrong person," she muttered. The man finally closed his book and looked out the window, his expression peaceful, like he was used to being ignored or judged. As boarding finished, the man reached down into his small bag and pulled out a pack of gum. He turned to Clarissa and gently asked, "Would you like one?" She looked at him like he had just offered her trash. "No, thanks," she said sharply. "I don't take food from strangers." Then she added, "Besides, I don't chew gum. It's common." The man didn't say anything, just nodded kindly and placed the pack back into his bag. A few minutes later, the flight attendants began offering water and towels. One of them stopped by the man and said with a smile, "It's good to have you with us again, sir." Clarissa raised an eyebrow. "Again?" she thought, but said nothing. Pretending not to care, she pulled out her phone, snapped a selfie, and whispered, "Might as well document the worst flight of my life." The man chuckled softly, not in a rude way, but like someone who didn't take offense. Clarissa caught that sound and turned sharply. "Something funny?" The man looked at her, his voice gentle. "No, not at all." She narrowed her eyes and turned away again, frustrated that he was so calm. She was used to people reacting when she snapped at them, but this man didn't even flinch. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the captain's voice came on. He welcomed everyone warmly and said they were in for a smooth flight. Clarissa didn't listen, too busy texting her friends about how cheap the flight suddenly felt. The man, however, closed his eyes, leaned back, and took a deep breath, as if flying was something sacred. Another flight attendant walked by, this one older, and gave the man a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Always a pleasure," she said warmly. Clarissa watched this and whispered, "Do these people know him or something?" Still, she said nothing out loud, not wanting to look stupid in front of others. But inside, something felt off. Why were all the crew so kind to this man who looked like he'd walked in off the street? Why did he seem so peaceful while she was annoyed by everything around her? She glanced again quietly and noticed that he wasn't wearing any logos, any brand names, any rings or watches. Just simple clothes, simple movements, and quiet eyes, eyes that had probably seen more than she could imagine. And yet, he was sitting in first class, with no complaints, no pride, and no need to prove anything. Clarissa shook her head, annoyed again, and thought to herself, Who even is this guy? She had no idea that this flight was about to teach her a lesson she'd never forget, and that the man she insulted might just be someone who could buy and sell everything she ever owned with a smile on his face. But for now, she just crossed her arms, leaned away from him, and stared out the window. Still unaware that her life was about to change mid-flight forever, the plane was now high in the sky, moving smoothly above the clouds. Passengers had started to relax, some reading, some watching movies, and others sleeping with their eye masks on. Clarissa, however, was still restless, shifting in her seat every few minutes. She couldn't stop thinking about the man sitting next to her, the one who looked completely calm. He hadn't said a word since the gum offer, and yet something about him made her feel uncomfortable, not because of anything he did, but because of how quietly confident he seemed. She glanced sideways and noticed he had taken out a notebook. He was writing something in it slowly. As if lost in thought, Clarissa squinted, trying to see, but couldn't make out the words. Probably some nonsense, she muttered under her breath. He heard her, but didn't respond, just continued writing. Clarissa let out a small, annoyed sigh and leaned toward the aisle. "Excuse me," she waved at a passing flight attendant. "Can I change seats?" The attendant looked surprised. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" Clarissa nodded but added, "Yes, I just don't feel comfortable." Next to him, pointing with her eyes, the flight attendant gave her a tight smile. "I'm sorry, the flight is fully booked. There are no open seats in first class." Clarissa leaned back, frustrated again. The man turned his head and said softly, "I'm sorry if I'm bothering you." His voice was calm, with no anger, no sarcasm, just sincerity. Clarissa stared at him, not sure how to reply. She expected him to defend himself or argue, but he didn't. He just looked her in the eyes with the calm of someone who had nothing to prove. She mumbled, "Whatever," and turned away later. When the flight attendant came by with drinks, she handed a glass of sparkling water to Clarissa and a bottle of plain water to the man. He thanked her with a warm smile, and the attendant said, "It's always a pleasure to have you on board." Clarissa heard that again. Always a pleasure, and couldn't take it anymore. She leaned toward the attendant and asked, "I'm sorry. Do you know him?" The flight attendant smiled carefully. "He's flown with us before." Then she walked away politely, leaving Clarissa with more questions. Not long after, the man noticed the child sitting across the aisle looking nervous. The boy was maybe 8 years old and flying alone. His hands were shaking as he tried to open his snack, and his eyes were wet with tears. The man reached over gently and said, "Hey there, need some help?" The boy nodded, wiping his eyes quickly. The man helped him open the snack pack, then offered his napkin. He smiled and said, "You're really brave, flying alone." The boy smiled back and asked, "What's your name?" The man answered, "Keanu," and shook his hand. The boy's face lit up, like, "The actor?" Keanu winked and said, "Something like that." Clarissa watched the moment quietly. Something in her chest felt strange, not anger this time, but discomfort. She realized she hadn't spoken a single kind word to anyone this whole flight. Not to the staff, not to the passengers, and certainly not to the man beside her, and yet here he was, helping a scared boy and smiling like it was the most natural thing to do. For a moment, she almost said something nice, but pride stopped her. She crossed her arms and looked away, pretending not to care. Then the older flight attendant returned with a soft blanket and handed it to Keanu. "Brought this just for you," she said gently. Clarissa blurted out, "Wow, getting special treatment, huh?" The flight attendant gave a patient smile. "Some passengers earn it," and walked away. Keanu unfolded the blanket and without a word, offered it to Clarissa. She blinked in surprise. "You're giving this to me?" He nodded. "You look cold." Clarissa's first instinct was to say no, to keep her wall up, but something in her softened just a little. "Thanks," she said quietly, taking the blanket. It was the first polite word she had said to him. The rest of the flight continued quietly. Clarissa leaned back in her seat, watching the clouds outside. Her mind was spinning, not from anger anymore, but confusion. Who was this man? Why did the crew respect him so much? Why did a kid smile at him like he was a hero? And why did she, for the first time in years, feel embarrassed about her own behavior? She looked at him once more. He was back to writing in his notebook, and then he closed it, leaned back and closed his eyes peacefully. Clarissa looked down at the blanket he gave her. Her fingers traced its edge slowly. She didn't understand it yet, but this man was changing something inside her without saying much at all, and she didn't even know the half of who he really was. But that truth was about to be revealed very soon. The plane had been in the air for more than 2 hours now. Most passengers were calm and relaxed. Some were sleeping. Others had headphones on, watching movies. But Clarissa couldn't stop thinking. Her mind kept returning to the man sitting beside her, Keanu. He hadn't said much during the flight, but the way he treated that young boy earlier. So kind, so natural, so gentle, and the way the staff spoke to him. Not like a regular passenger, but with deep respect. It confused her more with each passing moment. Clarissa was not used to mystery. She liked things to be clear, clean, expensive, and known. But this man beside her, quiet, simple, and kind, didn't fit into any box she understood. He had no big watch, no loud attitude, no fancy shoes, and yet people noticed him. People smiled at him. People respected him. She kept stealing glances at his face, trying to figure out who he really was. He had his eyes closed now, resting peacefully. A small smile sat on his lips like he was dreaming of something beautiful. Clarissa looked away quickly, annoyed with herself for even caring. Then she noticed a couple seated diagonally across from her. They were whispering and looking at Keanu. The woman's eyes widened, and she covered her mouth in surprise. Her husband leaned in and whispered something else. They both looked at Keanu again, this time with eyes full of recognition. Clarissa leaned forward slightly, curious. She saw the man pull out his phone and type something. Then he showed it to his wife, who gasped and nodded quickly. They had discovered something big. A flight attendant passed by again, offering snacks. The couple said thank you but didn't take any. Instead, the woman glanced at Clarissa, smiled politely, and said, "You're lucky to be sitting next to him." Clarissa blinked. "Who?" The woman pointed with her eyes. "Him, Keanu." Clarissa frowned. "What do you mean?" The woman didn't answer directly. She just said, "Some people carry quiet greatness." And then she turned away again, leaving Clarissa with more questions than answers. Now Clarissa was annoyed at herself, at the couple, and at Keanu. What was going on? Why did this feel like she was in the middle of some mystery that everyone else already understood? She opened her phone and searched quietly. She typed, "Keanu Airline." A few results came up, but the plane's Wi-Fi was slow, and the images wouldn't load fast enough. She groaned and turned off her screen, frustrated. The little boy across the aisle waved at Keanu again. "Are you really in a movie?" he asked with a big grin. Keanu opened his eyes, smiled, and said, "Maybe a few." The boy's mouth opened wide. "My dad loves your movies." Keanu chuckled. "Tell your dad I said hi." Clarissa froze. Now it made more sense. She looked at him again, properly this time. The long hair, the beard, the voice. Something in her memory clicked. She had seen him before, not in real life, but on a screen. In a movie. Suddenly, a strange chill ran through her. She turned her head and whispered, "Are you Keanu Reeves?" He looked at her, smiled warmly, and replied, "Yes, I am." Clarissa's eyes widened. Her cheeks turned red. She had insulted him, called him a nobody, refused his kindness, and all this time he had been that Keanu Reeves, one of the most famous actors in the world. I didn't recognize you," she said, her voice shaking. "That's all right," he said kindly. "Most people don't when I dress like this." Clarissa looked down at her hands, her mouth dry. She felt so embarrassed, so small. Her mind flashed back to her earlier words, how rude she had been. And yet, he had still offered her water, gum, and a blanket. She wanted to disappear into her seat. But Keanu didn't make her feel worse. He just turned back to the boy and smiled again. Not a single trace of pride or anger in his face, Clarissa. Sudden silence. She couldn't even think of anything to say. She had judged him for looking cheap, but his heart, his actions, they were richer than anything she had ever seen. Around her, more passengers were starting to whisper. A quiet buzz began to spread through the first-class cabin. People realized the man sitting among them was not just a star, but the owner of the very airline they were flying on. Clarissa closed her eyes and sighed deeply. This flight was not going how she expected, and deep inside, she knew the worst was yet to come, because the truth about Keanu was even bigger than just being famous. The plane was quiet again, but this time, for a very different reason, whispers had spread through the cabin. Some passengers were secretly glancing at Keanu with wide eyes and soft smiles. Others were quietly telling each other what they just found out. Clarissa sat stiff in her seat, her hands cold, her mind spinning. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. The man she had insulted, ignored, and treated badly for hours. He wasn't just a famous actor, he was someone far more powerful. She didn't know everything yet, but the word owner kept echoing in her ears. Owner of what? The airline? The entire company? It didn't make sense, but it also explained everything. The way the crew spoke to him, the respectful smiles, the quiet greetings. It was all real, and she had missed every sign. Suddenly, a small ding echoed. Through the cabin, the captain's voice came on over the speaker, calm and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. He paused for a moment, and everyone listened closely. We are currently flying at 37,000 feet and expecting to land on time. Clarissa sighed with relief, hoping the flight would just end now. But the captain continued. We also want to take a moment to recognize a very special guest on board today. A few passengers gasped, knowing what was coming. Clarissa's heart began to race. The captain's voice grew warmer. It is always an honor to fly with someone who not only supports this airline, but also helped build it. There were soft murmurs across the cabin. The captain added, Please join me in welcoming Mr. Keanu Reeves, the owner of our airline and a friend to every member of our crew. Applause filled the cabin, quiet at first, then louder. Passengers clapped, smiled. Some even stood slightly to look at him. Clarissa sat frozen, her mouth slightly open. She felt like the floor had dropped under her seat. Keanu slowly stood up and gave a small, polite wave to everyone. His face was calm and kind, not proud, not showy, just thankful. Thank you, he said softly. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. He nodded to the crew, who smiled back with respect. Then he sat down again like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Clarissa's face was burning. She looked down at her lap, feeling like everyone could see right through her. Every word she had said earlier played in her mind like a bad memory. She had laughed at his clothes, called him poor, refused his blanket, and now she realized she had spoken that way to a man who literally owned the plane she was flying in. She turned her face toward the window, blinking fast to hide the tears forming in her eyes. This wasn't just embarrassment, it was shame, and it wasn't about who Keanu was, it was about who she had been. She had treated a stranger with disrespect simply because of how he looked, and that stranger had shown her nothing but kindness in return. For a few minutes, the cabin remained filled with a quiet energy. Passengers were still whispering excitedly. Some were Googling his name, others were texting family about what just happened. But Keanu didn't seem to care. He simply took a sip of water, leaned back in his seat, and smiled at the boy across the aisle. Clarissa turned slightly toward him. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. She opened her mouth, then closed it. How do you apologize for being rude to someone who stayed kind the whole time? What could she possibly say to fix it? Keanu noticed her glancing at him and gave her a gentle smile. That smile made it worse, because it wasn't fake. It was the smile of someone who didn't hold grudges, who had already forgiven her even though she hadn't said sorry yet. She finally whispered, I didn't know." Keanu looked at her, nodding slowly. "It's okay," he said. "You don't have to know who someone is to be kind to them." His voice was soft, not angry, not proud, just honest. Clarissa felt a tear slide down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, trying not to cry in front of everyone. But her heart hurt, not because she had been caught, but because she knew she had failed as a human being. The rest of the flight passed quietly for her. She didn't touch her food, didn't watch a movie, didn't speak again. She just sat there, thinking about him and about herself. When the plane began to descend toward New York, she looked out at the clouds and whispered to herself, "I need to change, not for Keanu, but for the person she didn't want to be anymore." And that decision, born at 37,000 feet, would follow her all the way back down to Earth and change the way she saw the world. Forever. The plane started its slow descent, and the captain's voice came on again. "We'll be landing in about 25 minutes, he said. The passengers began to prepare, putting away their books, raising their seat backs, and turning off screens. But Clarissa was not thinking about landing. She was still sitting quietly, her eyes on the folded blanket on her lap, the same blanket that Keanu had offered her after she treated him so rudely. Her chest felt heavy, like something inside her had broken open. It wasn't just the embarrassment anymore. It was the truth about herself. The way she had judged someone based on looks, the way she had ignored kindness and chosen pride instead. And now she couldn't take it back, but maybe she could try to fix it. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad. She always carried it, mostly to write shopping lists or notes for her assistant. But this time, her hand moved slowly. Carefully, she began writing, not a list, but a letter. "Dear Mr. Reeves," she began, "I owe you a sincere apology." The words flowed out slowly, but from the heart. "I judged you, insulted you, and looked down on you. Not because of who you were, but because of who I was." She kept writing, her head bent low. "I was rude, cold, and proud, and you had every reason to ignore me. But instead, you offered me water, gum, and even your blanket." Clarissa paused, her eyes welling up again. "You treated me with kindness when I didn't deserve it. And that has taught me more than any class, book, or life coach ever has." By the time she finished, the plane had started its final descent. She folded the paper and held it in her hand. It felt like she was holding a piece of her pride ready to give it away. The wheels touched the ground, and the cabin filled with the usual sounds. Seat belts clicking, phones turning on, people stretching and chatting. But Clarissa remained quiet, the folded letter still in her hand. She took a deep breath and turned to Keanu. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly. He looked at her, smiling gently. "Yes?" "I wrote something for you," she said, handing him the paper. He took it carefully, nodding. "Thank you." She didn't say anything more, and he didn't open the letter right away. He just tucked it into his jacket pocket. The plane rolled to a stop at the gate, and the cabin doors were soon opened. People started to stand up and collect their bags. The boy across the aisle waved goodbye to Keanu. "Bye, Mr. Keanu," he said cheerfully. Keanu waved back. "Bye, champ." Clarissa waited until most people had stepped into the aisle before she stood up. She didn't rush, didn't push ahead like she normally would. Instead, she waited, then helped an elderly couple pull down their bag. She smiled for the first time that day, not because someone was watching, but because it felt right. As she stepped off the plane, she turned back one last time. Keanu was still there, smiling at the staff, thanking each of them. Not like a boss, but like a friend. Clarissa walked into the airport, her heels clicking softly on the floor, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Outside the terminal, she stood under the morning light. Cars were driving by, people rushing to their next meeting or hotel. But she stood still, looking up at the sky. Something had changed. not the world, but her view of it. That flight had begun with pride, judgment, and a belief that she was better than others. It ended with humility, growth, and a quiet promise to herself. She would do better, be kinder, and never again forget that greatness doesn't wear fancy clothes. It walks quietly, helps gently, and smiles when no one's looking. Somewhere behind her, in a private car, Keanu sat and finally opened the letter. As he read her words, his expression didn't change, but in his eyes there was warmth like he had seen this kind of change before. He folded the letter slowly and placed it back in his pocket. Then he looked out the window and whispered to himself. Another soul softened. That's all that matters. The car drove away, blending into the city traffic, and Clarissa? She didn't become famous that day, but she did become something far more rare. Someone who faced her flaws, learned from them, and chose a better path. And all of it began with one man, one flight, and one unforgettable lesson in kindness. The next morning, Clarissa woke up early, but something felt different. She sat on the edge of her bed, looking out the window at the quiet city. She still had the airline blanket with her, folded neatly beside her purse. She had planned to return it. But somehow it felt like a reminder, not just of the flight, but of who she had been and who she wanted to become. The memory of Keanu's calm voice echoed in her head. You don't have to know who someone is to be kind to them. Those words didn't leave her heart. They followed her into the shower, through breakfast, and even while she sat alone with her morning coffee. Clarissa had always lived a busy life. Photo shoots, brand events, social parties, high-end lunches. She wore the best clothes, took the best selfies, and walked like she owned every room. But now, it all felt empty. What good was all the luxury if her heart was cold? What was the point of perfect makeup if she couldn't even offer someone a warm smile? She turned on her phone and opened her social media. She scrolled through her old post pictures of designer bags, expensive dinners, vacation spots. Thousands of likes, but none of it felt real anymore. None of it made her feel proud, so she did something she had never done before. She opened her notes app and wrote something honest. I judged a stranger on a plane, and he turned out to be someone incredible. But the truth is, it shouldn't matter who he was. I should have treated him with kindness either way. Today, I choose to be better than I was yesterday. She posted it with no hashtags. No filters, no photos, just words, real words. And then she turned off her phone. Not caring what people would say, later that afternoon, she went to a local bakery. Not one of the fancy ones she usually posted about, just a small corner shop with real people and warm bread. She saw an old man sitting outside, shivering slightly, his coat too thin for the wind. Normally she would have walked past him without thinking, but this time she stopped. Excuse me, sir, she said gently. Would you like something warm to eat? The old man looked up, surprised. Are you talking to me? She nodded. Yes, anything you want. It's on me. He smiled with tired eyes. A small coffee and a croissant would be lovely. Clarissa bought 2 of each and sat with him. They talked for 15 minutes about the weather, the city, and his memories of better times. She listened, really listened. For the first time in years, when she got up to leave, he touched her hand and said, "Thank you, dear. You're a good soul." Those words hit deeper than any compliment she had ever received. Not about her looks, not her dress, but her soul. In the days that followed, Clarissa began to change quietly. She helped a mother with her stroller on the subway. She returned extra change at a store. She even called her younger brother, whom she hadn't spoken to in months, just to say sorry. And each time she did something kind, she remembered Keanu's face. Not the actor, not the airline owner, just the man who offered her a blanket and a smile, who taught her what quiet strength and kindness really look like. One day, she walked past a shelter near her neighborhood. She stopped and stared for a while. Children were laughing inside, their clothes a little torn, their shoes a little too big, but their smiles were bright. She walked in and said, "Do you need volunteers?" The woman at the desk smiled. Always, Clarissa started coming every weekend. She helped serve food, fold donated clothes, and even read books to the children. No one there knew her as the rich woman from Instagram. She was just Clarissa, and that was enough. Her heart began to feel lighter, her mind clearer, and her smile finally real. Then one evening, after a long day at the shelter, she found a letter waiting at her doorstep. There was no return name, just her address. Written in simple handwriting, she opened it and gasped. Inside was a short note. Dear Clarissa, thank you for your kind words on the flight. But more importantly, thank you for choosing to grow. The world needs more people like you. Keanu. Her hands trembled as she read it again. She smiled softly, holding the letter close to her heart. It was not just a thank you, it was a new beginning, and she knew, in that moment, her life would never be the same again. Days passed since the flight, but the story of what happened on board was spreading fast. Passengers who flew with Keanu shared their experiences on social media. Videos of the moment the captain announced Keanu as the owner of the airline were going viral. People loved how calm and kind he was. Even when someone treated him badly, Clarissa saw these posts everywhere on her phone. On TV, even on billboards, she watched the videos with a mix of shame and awe. She saw herself in some clips, sitting stiff and uncomfortable. She heard the whispers and the gasps from others. The story was no longer private. It was public. Her mistake, her apology, and Keanu's kindness were being talked about worldwide. Some people criticized her for being rude. Others praised her for admitting her mistake. She read comments like, "We all judge too quickly," and "Kindness changes lives." It was overwhelming but also hopeful. Clarissa realized her story was bigger than just her. It was a lesson for many. She posted her own public apology, a simple message. "I was wrong to judge. I am grateful for the kindness shown to me. I am learning to be better." The post quickly gathered thousands of likes and supportive comments. People shared their own stories of judgment and change. Clarissa felt connected to many strangers who wanted to grow too. News outlets interviewed her. She spoke honestly about how meeting Keanu had changed her, how a simple act of kindness on a plane had opened her eyes. She talked about the importance of humility and respect for everyone. Her words touched many hearts. Her story inspired others to think twice before judging. Meanwhile, Keanu quietly continued his life. He didn't make public statements or seek attention, but he donated generously to shelters and charities. He supported kindness in many unseen ways. His quiet power was making real change. Clarissa's life also began to change in other ways. Her family noticed she was softer, more patient, more caring. Friends said she smiled more. She started volunteering regularly. She wasn't the same proud woman from before. One evening, as she left a community center, a reporter stopped her. "Your story inspired millions," he said. Clarissa smiled humbly. "It inspired me first," she told him. "Sometimes, all it takes is one person's kindness to change a life." She hoped that kindness would continue to spread like a gentle wave, reaching everyone. Her experience had become more than a viral moment. It was a movement, a reminder that anyone could change, no matter how proud or cold they might feel. And that kindness was stronger than judgment, pride, or fear. Clarissa still kept the letter Keanu had sent her. It was folded and framed on her wall, a daily reminder of her promise to be better. She often thought about the flight, the blanket, the boy, and the man who had shown her what true greatness looked like. Her heart was full of gratitude for a stranger who became a teacher, for a moment in the sky that changed her world, and for the chance to start again. Months had passed since the flight, but the story between Clarissa and Keanu stayed alive in her heart. Her life had changed in ways she never expected. She wasn't rich in money or fame, but richer in kindness and understanding. Clarissa continued volunteering at the shelter every weekend. She helped the children, the elderly, and anyone who needed a hand. Her friends noticed the difference. They said she seemed happier, calmer, more real. She smiled more genuinely. laughed more freely, and listened more patiently. One afternoon, while helping organize clothes for donation, Clarissa saw a small boy shivering in the cold. His clothes were torn and his eyes full of fear. Without thinking, she took off her jacket and wrapped it around him. The boy looked up at her with wide eyes and a shy smile. Clarissa felt a warmth inside she had never known before. Helping someone like that was better than any expensive gift she had ever given herself. At home, Clarissa kept the letter from Keanu in a special box. Sometimes she opened it and read his words again. They reminded her that even the smallest kindness can change a life. She also remembered his smile, calm, gentle, and full of hope. It became her guide whenever she felt proud or angry. One day, Clarissa decided to share her story in person. She spoke at a local school about kindness, respect, and change. She told the students about the flight, the man she had judged, and the lesson she learned. The students listened quietly, some nodding, some smiling. At the end, many thanked her and said they would try to be kinder to her. Message spread slowly but surely. People told their own stories of judgment and forgiveness. Communities began small acts of kindness inspired by Clarissa's experience. It was a quiet revolution of the heart, growing beyond one flight, one letter, or one person. Meanwhile, Keanu kept living quietly. He never made a big deal of the event, but he continued supporting good causes and helping others in secret. He believed true kindness did not need applause or fame. His life was his message, and it was simple and strong. Clarissa sometimes wondered if they would meet again. She hoped to thank him in person one day, but even if they never crossed paths again, she knew the impact he had on her life was enough. It was a gift she would carry forever. The flight that started with judgment and rudeness had ended with kindness, humility, and change. It taught Clarissa and many others that people are more than their looks, that kindness is the greatest strength, and that every person has the power to change if only they choose to. And so life went on, with Clarissa living a new story, one of hope, growth, and kindness. A story that began with a stranger on a plane and became a lesson for the world.